leading a hedonistic life of alcohol addiction.
In the middle of it, but I know you're sick, but please don't make me sick. Just help me help you, right?
So firstly, you as the helper need to take responsibility for your mental health. Risky behaviors, it's like I didn't know who I was and I was spiraling into this place of consciously, and so I'm gonna act out over here. I have PTSD and I'm a provider in my household. Both of those can coexist, right? Maybe this is my purpose, this new human, like maybe.
Imposter syndrome, toxic, depression, mental health are all terms that are misused or maybe overused nowadays. But today we really want to understand the meaning of it. And we are privileged to receive the one and only Petra Velzeboer, who is a mental health expert, and he's going to give us some light on all these terms and also talk us through her journey. So, Petra, welcome to Potentia. We are honored and we are privileged to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Are you excited? We're so happy to have you. Petra, your name is Velzeboer, right? Where does Velzeboer come from? Because to me, it sounds Dutch, it sounds Dutch, German. You know, where does that come from? Can you tell us?
So, yeah, Dutch, you're absolutely right. So,
is it? Okay.
You said it perfectly. Usually people need to rehearse that name several times, but that was absolutely brilliant. So,
nice.
Yeah, Dutch passport, but kind of grew up all over the place, so a little bit more international, I guess.
So we get into that a bit later. So this morning, as we were talking, you know, we're having a chat with the team, and I just asked them, what do you guys think about entrepreneurship and what does it mean to you? So now I want to ask you the same. As an expert, can you define entrepreneurship, please, and tell us?
I mean, I think it's a tricky one because there's so many types of things people do these days.
Right.
But from my perspective, there's two sides to it. So one is like the kid who's got money from his parents and they've put in a seed round and they get to experiment with an idea, maybe glamorizing, you know, the Steve Jobs, the people from the past about like, oh, I want to get this big exit. And, you know, there's that whole side of things. And then there's the people that just don't fit in like kind of the corporate sort of mainstream way of doing things. And they just kind of keep not fitting and get a little bit fed up and decide to experiment, take risks and try something, because to stay safe in an environment becomes, you know, unsafe to them. And it feels like the only way for some of us.
Nice. Where do you see yourself actually? Which one is you? Which one is Petra? Are you the one that had...
Definitely no kind of handout from my parents. No. Definitely not. And definitely tried to work in normal jobs and to fit in and to do things the right way. And then there's so much energy that is spent on politics, meetings, just things that aren't
corporate.
About... And I've always wanted to create impact. And quickly, right? So am I going to spend like 30 years like talking about impact, or am I actually going to hustle and figure out how to do it? So I'm definitely in the second camp.
Right. Let's talk about your parents. You mentioned your parents because you said that they didn't hand that to you. So you kind of had to find out yourself. So we just want to go back in time and just talk about a bit about your childhood. How did your childhood impact your career choice? How did that happen?
Well, now that I reflect as an adult, you know, and a little bit later in life, I actually realized that the way I grew up gave me a lot of my skills for hustle and for entrepreneurship, but it wasn't talked about in that way. So I was raised in a really alternative way. I didn't go to school as a kid, so I guess we were used to risk, you know. Grew up all over the world. My parents joined a religious cult, so really it was communes, it was lots of people. I traveled a lot. The world was going to end. It was very dramatic. The world was going to end, and we were there to save the world, right? No pressure, right? And so as the world did not end, and I continued to live, I had to go through my own, like, where do I fit in? Like, all these people are living what I thought was a normal life, while I was figuring out, like, who am I? I didn't have an education or anything to speak of. And so for a while, I tried so hard to be normal, because I thought if I could just be normal, then I wouldn't have to think about trauma and some of the things that I'd been through in the past. And then I guess it was when I realized I could embrace how different I was and it could become my superpower. But of course, that's a really nice sentence. Right. The way it happens is it's gradual, it takes time, it takes risk, vulnerability. But what I realized was I've been doing sales my whole life.
Okay.
You know? Okay. Because I was like, why am I so good at sales? You know? And because you need to have that skill. Even though I'm a mental health consultant and an expert in that arena and spent time studying, when you build your own business, you got to be good at sales. You got to be good at people, hiring, like a whole accounting, like a whole host of other things, right? So I'm very good at sales. And I thought, actually, I was raised selling my whole life. Yes, we were evangelizing. Yes, we were persuading people to give us their money or to save their soul or whatever it was. Those are transferable skills, right? But interestingly, most of my siblings are in the safe camp. Okay. So we grew up in the same way. So it wasn't a given that that's what would happen. I probably got that chip on my shoulder that I think lots of entrepreneurs have. We want to prove something. Yes, I want to prove that this is possible.
Well, yeah. Your siblings, are they still in the religious cult, or you all escaped?
So we're all in different countries, in different places, leading quite different lifestyles. Right. So it evolved a lot as I grew a little bit older. You know, it's a little bit more mainstream, where the world doesn't end when you said it would, that you might need to evolve your belief system, right?
Of course. What about the relationship with your parents?
We're going there. Tricky. It felt like I have 2 kids myself now, and it's really interesting when you have your own kids and you think, I want to give them all the skills and the tools for living in the real world, right? So that they can be successful. And I don't just mean rich, right? I mean, like, successful means you can have healthy relationships, you can be fulfilled in what you're doing. And so I went through a long time where I thought, how can my parents not have done that for us? They were preparing us for the end of the world and a very immediate kind of situation, and not for like the nuance of living life, like choosing the types of things that you wanted to do. So I've got a strained relationship with them. I don't go to them for advice. If I was having a business problem...
because there's like a bridge between you, your relationship. You cannot have a normal parents and children relationship just because of that
it's
bridge.
Tricky.
Have you forgiven them for what they've done to
So
you?
I don't... I feel like the word forgive is a very religious term, right? Yeah. And for me, it's not so much about forgiveness. I mean, we could do a whole talk just on this,
just
right?
on that, yeah.
But I think it's more about acceptance and moving forward in a way that is useful for you, for your family, for the impact that you can create in the world.
Right.
So for me, I wrestled with that for a while. Like, should I forgive? But they were victims in a way too.
Oh, they were.
So it's not just as simple as black and white, you know? And so I don't wrestle anymore with the idea of forgiving them, but I've accepted things and I understand myself and I live a different life.
Obviously, you said that you didn't go to school, that you traveled a lot, so obviously that creates... Although traveling is good, but sometimes it can create some sort of trauma, especially in that specific setting that you were in. When you found out that you were pregnant with your first child, what was your first thought? Because of everything you've been through, obviously. So you knew that now you were going to be the mother, right?
Yeah.
What was your first thought when you found out?
I think in a strange way, I thought I was feeling a bit lost at the time. And like, I was a little bit 1 foot in, 1 foot out, leading a double life. So I learned quite early on as a teenager to wear a mask, to say all the right things in the community. I even got moved up into leadership. So I was part of...
In the community?
Yeah, in the community.
Wow.
But on the other side, I was leading a hedonistic life of alcohol addiction, risky behaviors. It's like I didn't know who I was, and I was spiraling into this place of I can't quite question things consciously, and so I'm going to act out over here. So when I was pregnant and I was 22, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is my purpose, this new human. Like, maybe at least something will matter, you know? But then, so that's when I moved to London. I moved to London pregnant.
Okay.
Moved in with my now ex-husband.
Okay.
And so didn't have an education, now had a kid, didn't know any rules for life. And that's how my career had to kick off.
Right. So you're 22. You moved from the United States to London.
I was in Holland at the time, so I
you were
just
in
moved
Holland.
over from Europe.
Okay, so you moved from Holland to the UK to settle down here with your, obviously pregnant.
Yeah.
And as you said, so you had no education.
Nope.
And that was the first time that you were really out of that community. Fully out of that community.
Fully out of it.
And you had to learn everything from scratch.
I mean, I could, it's not like I couldn't read or write.
No, of course,
it's not like I couldn't, I remember at 13 getting a library card and sneaking books.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God, this world of education. And I would read biographies and I would read stories of, people who were gay or who lived a different lifestyle or who were in addiction. Like, I had no idea that people could wrestle with thoughts and ideas no matter who they were, right? And so I had a lust for learning that I don't see in lots of kids who are given education. I was like, oh my God, it's a privilege, right? But when I moved here, remember, if you imagine living in communes, I don't know if you have a big family, but people everywhere. I'm one of 5 siblings and people everywhere. And so now I moved to London and I'm in this little flat and my boyfriend goes to work. I've got this little kid and silence, right? And so I'm sitting alone with my own thoughts and feeling lonely for the first time, invisible, like nothing mattered. And even though I don't agree with the direction I was going in as a kid that was given to me, we had a direction. Like we had a vision and a purpose and a mission. And so to sit invisibly with this little kid, I mean, I spiraled into depression, alcohol addiction that was much worse than before, and, wanted to end my life many times during that period. And so sometimes this is almost part of that chip on my shoulder is like, well, if you have the capacity to descend into such darkness and build your life back up, I mean, what? You're going to live your life paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah, no.
Why would you do that? Like, I could be dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
So there's this kind of fire of like, but I'm alive. What can I prove? What can I do?
But you mentioned quite a few times that you were depressed, that you struggled with a lot of addictions. Now, I know that a lot of entrepreneurs or even students or people who, in life who are going through a lot of pressure, who have targets and, a lot of goals, sometimes they find an escape in those drugs or in these addictions. And it's probably the moment when you take these drugs that you feel, oh, you're escaping your reality for a bit. Now that you're an expert, now that you are completely out of those addictions, but then what would be your advice to those people?
So it's maybe more of a question. So the question would be, what are you avoiding?
Right.
Right? Because sometimes it could be feelings, it could be emotions, it could be stress, it could be, many times depression is about the environment that we find ourselves in.
Right.
Right? So it's us not living our truth, our version of our lives. And so it's easier in a strange way to feel depressed or to escape through addiction than to actually ask ourselves, okay, what do I want? Beyond conditioning, parents, education, the direction you were given, you must go in this direction, the money that you make, these sorts of things. What do I want? And so many of us, somebody asked me that question. I trained as a coach and they asked me this, and I must have been, late 20s. And I'd never been asked that question in my life. My mind was blown. I was like, what do you mean, what do I want?
Yeah.
As a woman as well, it's like, what do I need to do? What should I do? What do other people need me to do? And we create our path based on those things.
Right.
But to say, what do I want? I thought, well, I want to do something for myself. It led to my divorce.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to wake up to doing the work and taking the action to change things. Addiction's a tricky one because some of us, there's a genetic component as well. And so I didn't grow up with my biological father, but I found out much later that there's loads of addiction on that side of the family.
Okay.
Even though I didn't grow up in that environment.
Yeah, but genetics follows you.
So some of us are more at risk. And so for me, I've been sober now for 15 years. For me, drinking alcohol is like flipping a switch and bringing me down a particular path.
Okay.
For other people, it's a lifestyle thing that they can learn to manage. But the first step, of course, is to wake up and take responsibility for your life.
Wow. I'm sorry, but there's something you said that really stuck to me. You said, living your truth. Mm-hmm. You repeated that, I think, 2 times. What does that mean to you, to live your truth?
So I don't think it's immediate. Sometimes people, coaches, self-development people, they're like, what is your purpose? What is your passion? As if immediately you should go, oh, right, it's this, right? For many of us, you don't know immediately.
No.
Your truth is a journey, right? And it's connecting to your body and your mind and going, this feels right. This doesn't. Mm-hmm. And doing that, right? Like moving within those questions until you, over time, can completely own your truth and who you are, which I'm able to do now. But it wasn't immediate when somebody first asked me. It was like, I know what I don't want, right? And I know I need to educate myself and build credibility. So those are things I do want. I had no idea where it would take me or what it would lead to, but it's honesty. And if I were to say, what's the solution or the, how do you win over addiction? Being brutally honest to yourself and other people.
Right. So honesty is the must have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it takes quite some time for people to be honest with themselves. Because, as you said, like, we tend to wear masks all the time.
Yes.
And I feel like in this society, or just human beings in general, we always fake it a lot. Mm-hmm. We always fake it. But even sometimes with our spouse or the people who share our lives, the people close to us, we tend to always just fake it and just pretend all the time. And it's a bit tiring, but yeah. Sorry, can you just 2 minutes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we're going to put that. I don't know if we're going to put that in the recording, but it's actually so tiring when people just fake it.
I think it's important.
Like, so, like, why? What? Just tell me if I'm your sister or if I'm, and it's. But I understand, again, these people going through that, because not these people, but I just understand why you would fake it, because I faked it a lot as well. It's just like, because you want to fit in, you just don't want people to think that you are weak, or you don't want people to see you as less as them or something like that. But if they're really close to you, if they're really your family members, I think they should be helping you. But whatever.
They should be, but they might not. Like, that's the reality, right? And so faking it and wearing a mask is not only exhausting, but it leads to physical and mental health problems, right? So for some people over time, they're like, oh, my back pain. I just keep getting these headaches, and they start getting physical symptoms. And for other people, it's mental health symptoms. I'm just anxious all the time. I just feel depressed. These things are going on, right? And if you throw in, like, people from minority backgrounds, right? If you throw in the other layers of generational trauma and issues that show up, right? Like, this stuff affects us.
It does.
And so finding our truth is not just like this, right? It kind of takes time and it takes bravery. And so people talk about vulnerability and these different things. I think, and it's worked for me, practicing bravery every day.
Right.
Saying one thing to someone,
Would that be your solution to people who try to get out? So honesty, we mentioned honesty, we mentioned so being truth to yourself, and now you're saying practice bravery. Is that something that you would do? I mean, you would advise people to do every day, right?
Absolutely. So those are steps that people can take. But interesting, when people are in, like, the corporate world or they're working regular jobs, they're wearing the mask, it's affecting them. So they think, if I become an entrepreneur and build up my own thing, I won't have that problem anymore. Well,
ta-da!
Right? Ta-da!
Same again.
Oh my goodness, right? It's still a struggle because the whole, like, entrepreneurship thing, there's all this, like, secrecy and, like, yeah, I got this investment and, like, oh, we're making this and we're doing this. It's this bro code stuff. Trying not to swear. So the mask is there too. Yeah. The mask is in relationships. Like you said, the mask, just because you've stepped over doesn't erase a lifetime of conditioning and expectation.
Right.
You just transfer it.
That's it.
Right? So, like, you still have to, it's a daily practice to do these things, if you're in a business for someone else or if you're working for yourself.
Yes. A little bit more about depression. I live with a family member who was depressed, and at that time, I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know these panic attacks, and I didn't know what depression meant.
Yeah.
Right. I was a little girl, and I could see that person's reactions and how, we were trying to adjust ourselves to the person's behavior and stuff. And now, obviously, now that I'm a grown up, I understand that the person was depressed, and I understand that the person was sick. And I feel like we always tend to talk about the person that is ill, but we forget about the surroundings. We forget about the family, the people living in the same house as that person. I think they suffer as much as the person. So now that you were depressed and you had a son and you had your husband, how was that for you? Now that you look back at how your state, at how you were, how was that for you? And how would you give advices to those people,
Yeah, I mean, back then, it was a mess. Like I didn't know what was going on. My ex didn't know, my husband didn't know what was going on. And certainly a child doesn't know. No. And like you said, they adjust with the unsaid. So there's this unsaid elephant in the room thing, and everyone's like, let's just tiptoe around it, right? And so for a kid, that can be really confusing. And we're missing an opportunity as well, because kids grow up thinking, that's one thing we don't talk about, right? Or we talk about it in secret, right? And so we're perpetuating stigma through that behavior, right? And so my partner experiences depression. And I've got PTSD. So we've had to have open conversations about how we can support each other through these things. But also, if he needs extra sleep because he's experiencing depression, I talk to my kids who are in the house. I'm like, oh, hey, he's going to bed early because he's struggling a little bit, especially the winter, like those months where, so, people always use the oxygen mask metaphor of like, put on your own oxygen mask. Yeah. It's just become a whole brand of itself, right? It's not always possible.
No.
It's not always possible. And it's also making people that are supporters feel not great. Like, oh, well, I didn't put my oxygen mask on and it's affecting me. And I think sometimes we're doing this same time. You know what I mean? And so we want to give people space.
Right.
But we also want to challenge people to take responsibility for their mental health. Right?
Yeah, I think that the part of the word responsibility is my favorite one. Because again, I said I went through, I was in the middle of it. But I know you're sick, but please don't make me sick. Just help me help you. Right? Tell me. And communication, and it adds up when the person didn't have a happy childhood or the person always felt alone. So there's a lot, but it's like, I want to help, but get me in your bubble, like give me the space to help you. And it's a bit strange because I feel like it's a bit like a roller coaster. Like it's just going up and down and up and down. And it's like, let me just help you, but the person doesn't give you the space and doesn't communicate with you. It's difficult to help them. Difficult. It's so hard.
Yeah. But so firstly, you as the helper need to take responsibility for your mental health.
Definitely.
So that means connecting with other people, movement and exercise, getting out of the situation sometimes. If you're a child, you don't know all those things and you don't have that freedom. So that's a different scenario, right? But if you're a friend or a partner or a colleague, all of those things are true. Somebody else can't make your mental health bad unless you let them, right? So you've got to go to a therapist, like get some support, like you've got to work on you. But also, a person who's experiencing poor mental health, depression, anxiety, whatever, they don't want us as friends to say, come on, just go outside. Just do something. Just do this. Just do this. Because the just do this is impossible.
Yeah, for them it's
too big.
It's too big. Yeah.
But what can help is listening. So sometimes just being in the mud with them and just going, and what else? Like, what? I'd just love to hear you out, giving them space. And then also going, I'm going for a walk. Do you want to come with me? Let's
instead
of like, you got to go outside. Yeah. Don't you know by now? Right? So kind of listening and giving them space, but also a little bit of challenge. So I might ask somebody in my team, what's one thing you can do to invest in yourself today?
Okay.
Or if they're struggling, I'll be like, so what's one thing you could do to support yourself through this?
Right.
And then how can I help? But it's the first step is like, what is in your control? Because there will be things, right? But of course, depression is like a continuum. By the time you're over here, clinical depression, it's really difficult. But remember, there's all this stage before you get there.
Right.
And those are the stages where we could be supporting each other differently.
I am from an African background. And for us, the word depression, as I told you, so I grew up with a depressed person in my family. And at the beginning, we didn't know because we had no clue. It's just that we don't know. We don't know. And in Africa, okay, maybe now because of a lot of people from the diaspora are going back to Africa, so maybe they're bringing these terms of depression and mental health. But how would we address these issues to those people there? And because there's the culture, the African culture or the Congolese or the Ghanaian or the culture, and then you have the religion as well.
This I can relate to.
Right, and you were in a cult.
Yeah.
So when you mix it all up, is like, how do we, take distance and like see, like, what's the situation, like have another perspective and help, because it's all about help. I want to help you to get there. I want to help you to feel better. What would you advise us?
So I get the religious connotation, but also like it's our primal need as humans to belong.
Okay.
And if we think of African culture and community and families and, expectations are within that. And I relate to it in a commune setting, which would have been different, but had some threads like, you better speak the same language if you're going to fit into this community. If you don't speak the same language, right, of success, of expectation, of all these things, you could be kicked out, right? And that can happen in subtle ways. Oh, we just don't talk about so-and-so. Or worse ways, we're going to make an example of them and do an exorcism or do something bigger because they're possessed. Like those are the extreme variables, right? When it comes to this. But certainly you're not going to belong and you're going to be kicked out, right? And then we could go even wider around the system of mental health in general, which is medicalizing it. There's something wrong with you if you're depressed, rather than there's a genetic component and there may be something in my environment or my history that is contributing to me feeling this way. We could talk about this a lot, but what do we do? So I find like it's really hard to educate backwards.
Okay.
Our parents, our grandparents, even the education system. It's tricky. Like I find it's really hard for me to educate my parents on emotional health or what some of this stuff means. But what we can do is create movements for change that enable us to change forward, right? Slowly. The way we do that, first of all, your YouTube channel, like things like this is like information going into places where it never went to before. So you could be the kid in a community that's quite kind of closed, but be on YouTube and be like, oh, that person was open about their mental health. That person, and we need more people from African backgrounds being open, right? Telling your stories, because then people go, oh, me too. Like that person can talk about, like I'm not going to have that impact, right? But your stories are going to be the things that do make an impact.
Right.
And the only way we can ever create real change is through leading by example.
That's it.
And that takes bravery. And that takes not just going, oh, take some medication. Yes, medication can be useful, but it doesn't answer the wider questions of like, I have been ostracized from a feeling of belonging for so many years that now I'm depressed, right? So the first step is always self-awareness. What can I learn about other people and how they are doing it? And then live a different way. It's very different within cultures to say, I'm going to talk to somebody about what's going on for me. I'm going to go do that, right? Than to say, you should really talk to a therapist about what's going on for you, right? So it's going to take time, but I do think the globalizing of this topic and the media outlets can be supportive. Some people who've struggled have said, the first place I ever talked about my mental health was in an anonymous forum online. Right? Mm-hmm. And then I could like practice. And then I got support and not judgment. Mm-hmm. And so over time, and you could do that from anywhere, right? And then over time they thought, well, if those people supported me, let me talk to this trusted friend.
Right. Mm.
But I might not go to my pastor. I might not go to certain people. And that's okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't know what comes up for you because
no. It does make sense. It does make sense. Definitely self-awareness, and also as you mentioned media as well, and just put the word out there. And as you said, lead by example. I really love that. I really love that.
Successful people struggle with their mental health. But there's this kind of narrative that if you have depression or anxiety, you're never going to be the doctor or the person who's going to, provide. Or, I have PTSD and I'm a provider in my household. Both of those can coexist, right? Mm-hmm. My partner's got depression and he's successful in his job.
Right.
Both of those can coexist. Like that's the education we need to do. Okay. It doesn't mean like, oh, you have a mental illness. I'm sorry.
You're just out.
It's never going to achieve, but we'll look after you. They're there. It's not. It can be a driver for many of us.
Now you are trying to focus more on the new work culture, world culture. Obviously, you've been in a cult, and I remember I read something on your LinkedIn where you said that...
culture like corporate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Culture like corporate. That's what you said. Yeah. And you said you basically moved from one cult to another. Uh-huh. Can you please just give it some light on what you said? What does that mean to you?
So for me, it's about oppression and greed and not having a voice, not having autonomy, right? So you've got to be just keep quiet and play your role in the system. Don't be too much, don't be too little. Just like be the little ant in the machine, right? Not to mention the, leadership. I use terms like brainwashing. It seems a bit extreme, but that's what capitalism is, right? It's just saying you need more stuff in order to feel like enough. And that's what corporates are. We need more stuff in order to feel purposeful and like we're playing a part. And there's nothing wrong with being a cog in a machine. But when you don't have psychological safety and you're unable to be yourself and you're like trusted and you're part of the family and then they fire you and nobody looks at you and you've got to be locked out of all your systems within 1 second, and you're like, it's so similar. There's so many similarities.
Yes, because that's what happened to you. Because once you were out of the cult, you were just dead to them. You were just like, and you said that you were in higher ranks in the cult. So they kind of knew you, they knew who you were, but then they just ignored you as soon as you left, I guess. And that's even when you started being depressed as well.
I worked really hard for them, and then I was dating somebody who was outside of the cult, which was illegal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so once that came out, I was going to be demoted and put on 6 months probation. Was what they called it, right?
Okay.
So I had a choice. Either I could go through this prove myself again, back to basics, or I decided to leave and said, well, let me spend that 6 months seeing what it's like and trying to see if I could make a successful relationship. But I think for many of us, we were like, oh, you're dead to us. But I did the same thing. I was like, ooh, I need some distance, so that I can learn to think for myself. All my thought, what's my thought and what's their thought? Like, I don't even know. So sometimes you need that gap in order to figure that out, to even ask yourself what you want.
And now you think because correlation, is that a word in English? The correlation you did, correlation you did with the actual working world, the corporate world. It's funny because these days I talk a lot with my friends about everything that we go through, because we are actually the adults. It's us now. It's our time, So
how did that happen?
I know. So we talk a lot about what happens to us, like what did the manager said and what did the manager do, and a lot of them go through very unfairness. And one of my close friends, actually, she even so I'm just gonna make the story very short, but she had a burnout at work, and then when she came back, they didn't even dare to ask her how she was doing. It was just or you came back, but you didn't perform well before leaving, before going for 4 weeks, sick. And then when she came back, it was all about not judging her, but like giving her very bad feedbacks, and she ended up leaving the company. And I feel like a lot of people go through this stuff in the corporate world. And as you literally, just as you said, is like, as soon as you say something that is against the system, as soon as you question the system, is like, oh, she's disturbing us, just let's escape her.
Let's disappear her.
Mm-hmm. Now, for you as a person, after everything you've been through in your childhood and everything, how does it work for you now? Because you have you are a mental health expert, and you are a mental health consultancy company, PVL. Now, how does that work for you? Because you're taking care of other people's mental health, you counsel them, you talk to them a lot, and it must be a lot for yourself as well. And you mentioned your partner as well, who's struggling as well with their mental health. Now, how does that work for you, and how are you feeling now?
Great question. I think mental health is never static. Just like going to the gym, like fitness, it's not just like, I just stay at peak performance all the time, right? It's like we all have to invest in ourselves in different ways to sustain that level of success and also performance. And so my partner invests in himself. He knows he needs a certain amount of hours sleep, a little bit more than other people. He needs to get it, and he knows he needs to work out. And he does some other things as well to maintain it. So he's good, right? And equally for me, I need to work out, right? I need to be honest. I need to talk to people.
Yeah.
And there will be times where during busy seasons, we've got one coming up, it's incredibly busy. And when you have a purpose-driven business, it's different than a product.
Right.
Like it matters in your soul, right? So there are times where I'll just push myself to my absolute limits and just need to crash out and sleep for a little while. I think for me, it's awareness and knowing those early signs, right? So if I ever snap at my kids, for example, like, why didn't you do this? I'm like, whoa, what is it about me that needs to invest in myself, right? I'm going to get
Don't say that to an African person.
Yeah. That's true. That's a whole other show.
I know.
Right? But what are the things, again, it's radical responsibility for my mental health and for my life. And the trouble with entrepreneurship and startups, that kind of idea, is like we're always thinking about the exit and the end and the money and like, what's my life going to be after this bit is over, right? I'm like, what's the journey going to be like now, right? How are we going to enjoy our full life and not just drive ourselves to a place that finally we get our exit and then we're so burnt out and broken that we can't actually enjoy it. So I think everyone needs to apply this to themselves differently.
Right.
And what works for one part of your life, like, trust me, when I had 2 young kids, I did a master's degree at night and I was working full time. I was not investing in my well-being. I was pushing to catch up because other people were already there, and I needed to not get sleep and But it was a phase of my life, and I'm happy I did it, right? And so now that's given me choice to live a different life now.
Yes. It does. Wow. Whew. That was a lot of information, a lot to intake, but really, really spot on. Thank you so much. Now the last one. Recently, I don't know what happened, but all over, I see everywhere the word toxic relationship, toxic boyfriend, toxic girlfriend, toxic work environment, toxic this, that. It's like everywhere. And I feel like people just misuse it and overuse it. But you, as a professional psychotherapist, you actually understand the meaning and the depth of this word. Can you define it? Define it first, or give us your understanding of that word?
I think lots of these terms, it's subjective, right? And it becomes, like you said, it's just a bit trendy. Like, he's so toxic. It's like, well, what about you? Right? But even I'm so depressed.
Yeah,
because I I just had some disappointing news. That doesn't mean you have depression, right? Or I'm so OCD because I like my cupboards tidy. It's really not the same thing, right? And so toxicity as well, it's how we experience an environment. And an environment can be two people, it can be a household, it can be a workplace, a community, right? And so that can have to do with our resilience levels, with our personal triggers and trauma, like how are we experiencing an environment? And of course, there are such a thing as toxic environments, which is when you have somebody with very low emotional intelligence, perhaps bullying behavior. If we think of relationships, we think of domestic violence, that's toxic, right? But you can be in an environment that is toxic for you.
You're right.
So for me to be in a just slightly controlling environment is toxic for me because of how I grew up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make choices for me.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that you're so toxic, you guys need to sort yourselves out. It just means it's not a good fit for me. Because I think it's going to take too much energy for me to just do the normal thing in this environment, right? So I think it's like, what do people mean by it? What do you mean by it? And what do you want to do with that information?
Exactly.
Because if it's just like toxic, this is the way it is, let's keep drinking, then nobody's solving anything.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That was clear for me. Understood everything. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, follow Petra on her social. We're going to put all the information for you to follow her. She's on LinkedIn. She's going to launch her book soon. And she has a podcast as well. So follow her and take care of your mental health. Thank you.